All right, let's begin with a word of prayer. Our gracious God, we do thank you that you are in control of all things. Lord, we thank you that you were ordering the events of mankind, Lord, during the days preceding the coming of Christ, and that you did create and orchestrate such a stage that would be most conducive to the reception of Jesus Christ and the spread of the gospel. Lord, I pray that you would give to us the wisdom and the discernment as we consider the fullness of time. Thank you for all that you've done. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, today we're covering the expansion of Christianity. This is our second point of Lecture 1, and there are going to be three factors that we're going to be looking at. The Jewish factor, the Roman factor, and the Greek factor. All right, and under each there will be a few points of mention. All right, so what we will do first then is look at the Jewish factor. It is no surprise to see the link between what we call New Testament Christianity and the Jewish religion, or Old Testament Christianity. What I want to do at the very beginning is remind us, I know this is nothing new for us, but I want to remind us that the Old Testament religion is Christianity. All right, it is Christianity. So when Christ comes on the scene, in the fullness of time, and you have the incarnation, and he is going about making his disciples and presenting his gospel, he is not going to be preaching a religion that is distinct from the Old Testament. Because remember, what is the Old Testament? The Old Testament is the book of promises, and the New Testament is the book of promises fulfilled. All right? So, we want to make that distinction. All right? Or we want to make that observation, all right, that when we talk about the expansion of Christianity and the religious reason for that expansion being the Jewish religion, I'm not talking about two separate things until we talk about Judaism. I'm going to make a distinction between Judaism and Old Testament Christianity. Judaism was Old Testament Christianity abused, right? So we're going to be looking in some ways in which Judaism brought about or helped the expansion, but then also the Jewish religion. So does that make sense? All right. Judaism is what the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, were preaching against. The emphasis on the externals, the emphasis on sacrifices without the heart. To fast forward a little, talk about the Pharisees. All right. The Pharisees were the religious leaders of the day, and they were a particular Jewish sect, and they were, by their own admission, the true teachers of the Old Testament. But Christ comes on the scene, and he is constantly just bucking up against the Pharisees. And the point is, the Pharisees grossly misinterpreted the Old Testament. They were stuck on the externals. They were stuck on the eternal importance of circumcision while neglecting God's admonition, which was repeated by Moses, that there also needs to be the circumcision of the heart. Right? So Phariseeism is under that Judaism head. And that is not the pure Christian religion as even expounded in the Old Testament. Yes. All right, so Jewish factor. The first thing that I want to mention is monotheism. The belief in one God was not new when the New Testament writers wrote under inspiration. All right, the Jewish religion, the Old Testament, emphasized monotheism. Now, when Christ came to this earth, he did so at a time where polytheism was prevalent, where people believed in many gods. And Christ said, no, there's one God. The greatest commandment is to love the Lord thy God. And so when he taught that, he was not teaching something new. He was teaching something that's always been true. Right? So the Jewish belief in monotheism contributed to the expansion of Christianity because it wasn't new. And this is where we see the Jews, they're being distributed throughout the empire, helped that. Right? Now, people were aware of who the Jews were. People were aware, all right, in the Roman Empire, all right, what the Jews believed concerning God. So they had heard of the belief in monotheism. Now, they may have objected to it, but they had heard of it. All right? And so when the Christians begin to spread their message, and they're preaching one God, it's not brand new. So the emphasis on monotheism spread as many Jews were scattered throughout the Mediterranean area. The second factor would be the idea or the hope of a Messiah, the messianic hope, the belief that a coming Messiah was to bring righteousness to earth. And again, as the Jews spread throughout the Roman world, so spread the message of a messianic hope. Now again, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and these major Jewish sects, these Judaizers, they missed the point of the Messiah. Right? They thought that the Messiah was going to be one who came and delivered them from the tyranny of Rome. All right? They missed the point. But the concept of a messianic hope was there. All right? And so as Christ comes and he begins to do all of the things that were prophesied of the Messiah, all right, there was then going to be, all right, the fulfillment of that messianic hope. Now again, did many people miss that? Yes. Some people had some crazy views as to what the Messiah would do and be. And that's why in the Gospel of Mark you sometimes have that, what New Testament theologians call the messianic secret in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus did not want to necessarily just go around saying, I'm the Messiah, because so many people had a warped view of the Messiah. He was going to demonstrate his messiahship by his works, by his deeds, by who he was. Right, to confirm. Right. Right. So again, as the Jews spread throughout the Roman Empire, so spread the message of a messianic hope. Now, the misinterpreted views of the Messiah, that's a problem with the Judaizers. It's not the problem with the messianic hope. All right. Okay, so we have that. The third Jewish factor would be ethics. And your textbook will also draw on this. The emphasis on the moral law by the Jews presented an ethical system. The Ten Commandments stood in stark contrast to the pagan ethical system, all right, that many imbibed in that Roman Empire. So again, as the Jews spread throughout the empire, they took with them, all right, this ethical system that was contrasted with this pagan immorality. So pure religion emphasize the dirtiness of the heart. Again, unfortunately, though, by the time Christ comes to earth, many of the Jews had so grossly misinterpreted the moral law that they had wrong views about it, right? Again, remember, Christ and his apostles were walking through the field on the Sabbath, and the disciples picked some corn. And the Pharisees all of a sudden come up there and say, oh, you're breaking the Sabbath. Well, by the time Christ comes to earth, many people did not apply the moral law correctly. And so Christ had to change their thinking on that, or try to change their thinking. But that emphasis on the moral law did spread. All right? So when people looked at the Jews in the Roman Empire, they knew them as a people who held to a strict code of ethics. Right? And so again, when the gospel message then begins to permeate, and men and preachers like Paul are talking about, if this has been done to you by grace, then you live a certain way. All right, it's within that framework of the moral law. All right, and so again, the ethics were not something that were brand new. All right, as people heard the Christian message. All right, and then the next Jewish factor we have already alluded to a number of times, and that would be the Scriptures, what we now call the Old Testament. One of the ways in which the Jewish people prepared the way for the Messiah was that God's revelation came to them, all right, in written form. All right, God spoke to Moses. God spoke to the prophets, and we have in the book of Hebrews, verse 1, all right, God, who at sundry times spoke in divers manners, all right, to the prophets, has now spoken to you through Jesus Christ. All right. Now here's the thing. It's the same God who's doing the speaking. All right. And so the Old Testament then prepares the way. Look at how much Jesus, the disciples, Paul, and those who wrote the epistles, how much they quoted from the Old Testament. And then look at the book of Hebrews. The Hebrews gives to us, all right, if you want the right interpretation of the Old Testament. And it says, all right, Christ is the better than the angels. Christ is better than Solomon. Christ is better than Moses. Christ is the fulfillment of everything. All right? And so if you read the Old Testament, here you have the message. All right, you have the message fulfilled. All right, so that is one way in which the Jewish factor, all right, contributed by the Old Testament. And then the final factor would be the synagogue. Right, an institution that was useful in the rise of early Christianity. Remember, Paul first preached there, wherever he went. All right. Now, if that's the case, you see that wherever he went, there was a synagogue, which, again, reminds us that the Jews were spread throughout the empire. Right. Right. And so that's where it was preached. That was the preaching house. Right. And then we have now the church. And we have this more fully developed in the New Testament, where what is the primary definition of the church? It's not a structure. It's the people. All right. But yet we do have a preaching house. But we are the church. All right. And we gather. We gather. Paul says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. All right, so this synagogue concept, all right, is one factor among multiple Jewish factors that contribute to the expansion of Christianity throughout the empire. All right, and again, all these things being said, we must not forget again that the message of the Old Testament has to do with Christianity. When we talk about the expansion of Christianity, we're not talking about the expansion of a brand new religion. All right. It is true religion fulfilled, all right, in Jesus Christ. All All right? So we want to then make that distinction between Old Testament Christianity and Judaism. All right, we come now to the political reasons for expansion. All right, we have the Jewish reasons. Now we come to the political reasons here, and we have a few things to mention under there. So political, and this is going to be the Roman factor. All right? The political contribution to the expansion of Christianity was chiefly the labors of the Romans. All right? And here is, you want to see a clear demonstration of the sovereignty of God orchestrating the affairs of man. This is where you can see it as plain as day. The Romans were pagans, but yet God is in control even of the pagans. And God was, if you say, orchestrating and manipulating the pagan leaders of this world to conquer and to conquer a land and create an environment to which Christ came. And it could be easily spread. And you look at Caesar Augustus. All right, he's this pagan person, and he has no thought of accomplishing the will of God in his own mind. Right. And here he is trying to destroy the promise. And all he is doing is catering to the promise. And it becomes a beautiful picture of the sovereignty of God. And here's how we say, what you got that passage in Galatians 4. Paul could have just wrote, that God sent forth his Son to be, but he said, in the fullness of time. Yeah, in the fullness of time, when God had everything perfectly set up, he sent forth his Son. And that's what we're going to be looking at here. So you see how God used pagans to accomplish his will. A people who are idolaters, a people who are guilty of emperor worship. Those same people who were ignorant of the one true God were used by God, all right, to accomplish his ends. And the first thing that I want to address here is the breaking down of national barriers. All right, which is for unity. All right, what makes the Roman Empire so brilliant is not necessarily its size, but the unity that was created within it. It was not an empire of conquered provinces that continued to hate each other. But the way that Rome went about its conquering gave to the conquered nations and provinces a feeling that, hey, now you're Roman. Right? Now you're one of us. Right? We're one. All right? And at the time, the Roman Empire was virtually the known world. We've got a map here. This shaded area, all right, gives to us the boundaries, all right, of the Roman Empire. Just so you can see how large this really is. We've got, all right, the Atlantic, all right, all the way over to the Euphrates. You've got up to the lowlands of Scotland, all the way down to Africa. That is a huge, huge chunk of land. And Rome, over here in Italy, the center of it all. and it was just a huge, huge empire. But what makes it so great, all right, in this regard is, again, not its size, but the fact that they created intercommunication with one another. Right? They created a semblance of oneness. They tried to bring everyone under one political structure. Right? That way, we're all under. No longer am I, if I say this, loyal to this province. I'm loyal to Rome. Right?
And also we can see in the conqueror, they didn't remove the people from their nation. They left them there.
Right.
And established an empire around
Right.
where they did where they conquer. And then that make them give those a sense of national.
Yeah.
Nationalize those people.
It gave them, a sense of belonging to the empire. You're not just a conquered people.
So,
You're one of us.
so was it why, this is the reason Paul said, I'm a Roman citizen?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was a Jew, all right, but he was, the understanding would be that at least, one of his parents, I guess his mother maybe, would have been a Roman citizen, so which automatically made him one. And so that's why there was great fear, all right, when they hit him, and then they found out he was a Roman citizen, because as a Roman citizen, he had special privileges, all right. And this sense of unity by the breakdown of national barriers was contributed or made possible by free movement within the empire by way of their highway system. All right, we're all familiar with, the cliche, all roads lead to Rome. All right, well, quite literally, all roads led to Rome. Extending from Rome, the capital, all right, there was a revolutionary system of highways, all right, that led out of the city into the various portions of the empire. And from Rome, there were 5 main roads, right, that led out of the center. And then they just started going everywhere. All right, you've got the city, and then 5 roads going in all different directions lead out of Rome and go anywhere. And not only were there roads, but there were maps. Right? Here's your atlas. Here in Rome, you want to get somewhere, here's how to get there. They had, detailed on those maps, directions, distances, stopping places. You can't get, to your destination in a day. Well, here's where you need to stop. And that all of a sudden takes someone on the western part of the empire able to go to the eastern part of the empire. Now we can go wherever. Now, do you see what happens? Whenever you have travel, you have the exchange of ideas, right? And so when you have more people traveling about, now, and we can see very clearly then how rapidly the Christian message was able to spread. Yeah. Right, I mean, the Great Commission was more easily made available because of this system. Again, all in the providence of God. All right, all under His superintendence. Now, again, when you have the free movement, the emphasis becomes less on the individual and more on the universal. So again, the fact that you can travel means that I'm not limited to this province. Sure, I appreciate my heritage, but I'm Roman, and I can go anywhere. And so that became something that was incredibly conducive, right, to the spread of Christianity.
That have made it a lot of easier on the day of Pentecost, so the
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
and then they could see what's going on.
Yeah,
he
sure.
learned what's going on.
And then it,
Go back.
yeah, then it made it easier to go back home. Yeah, so, right. But I mean, even, I don't know if you've got a map of Paul's missionary journeys in the back of your Bible. I mean, you know, check out his journeys. I mean, he was all over. But he was at major provinces within the empire. Again, once you have travel, people aren't just now traveling on what we would call holiday. Right? Now you have business. Business opens up. Look at Corinth. All right, Corinth was, a central place, and there's a church there. At all of the key places, you find Paul going and establishing churches, and then from there, you just have this constant, I want to say, domino effect. You plant a church, right, in a key place, and then out of that, and you're just, so no matter what you're doing, you're constantly having churches being spread. Yeah. Right? And then the third Roman factor, all right, was, the Roman law. All right, this was a way, all right, to cultivate unity. Now, it became a universal law. You were treated as a Roman citizen, because along with this came the right of citizenship. Again, when Rome conquered a place, they did not just conquer them and make them slaves. Eventually, they gave to them the right of citizenship. And again, this was given to Paul. And you see that benefit that he has. But if you are then treated, even if you were not born a Roman citizen, you could become one, and you're treated as them. So this universal law that they had, right, became a sense of unifying. And again, it made it easy to go from one city to the next and still be protected. Right? And so you have all of these things that just, all of them are emphasizing human solidarity. That, look, we're part of the human race. Even, I believe it was Marcus Aurelius, made the comment, as the leader of Rome, I'm Roman. But as a man, I belong to the world. All right. Now, notice then how that is even conducive to the message of the gospel. All people are sinners. All people stand under God's wrath. And what does Paul write to the Romans? Whether you're Jew or Greek, it doesn't matter. We have this same solidarity, not just under Roman law, but under God's law. And we're all in need of salvation. And then you go and then you present the gospel, not just to this tribe or this, but the free offer is made. Right? You see then how just the very ideals that the Roman Empire cultivated among its people was then conducive to receive the message of the gospel. Right? And again, you have to just stand back in utter amazement and say, God is good and God is great.
To grasp the concept that I was telling you, because just for the Jew, yes, the Jew, but no, it's not only that.
Right, right.
They receive the concept, it's like a global, like you say, we got a global, communication, we got a global business, everything. So it's
Right.
like even America that doesn't keep me from having business in Japan, China.
Right, there's a oneness.
Yeah.
Right, there's a oneness.
That global idea is that, no, that's something you can look far back and you say most of it is a concept.
Right, right. And now we come to the third. And that is the intellectual reason. This is the Greek factor. All right, and the first one is very obvious. All right, and that would be the language. All right, the language of the common man in the Roman Empire was Greek. All right, doesn't matter where you're at in the empire. All right, Latin was localized. All right. Latin was localized, but Greek was the common language. And again, this goes on. Yes, sir. Romans spoke Latin. But, well, the Roman Catholic Church, their liturgy is still in Latin. Right. Right, that is Latin. Right. And when you have the, later on, when we'll get to this, actually you can even see it in here. All right, the church in the Roman is eventually going to be right down a border, all right, the east and west. And over here, you're going to have Latin, and over here, you're going to have the Greek language. And some of the confusion when we get to the 4th century is that many in the West were not as good in Greek as they were in the time of Christ. All right, and so some of the confusion over how what terms we use in talking about the nature of Christ, the Trinity, are going to be confused, because all of our councils are going to take place over here, and they're going to be done in Greek. And so that's going to be sometimes the cause of confusion over here. Yeah, Roman came after the Greek, all right, and the reason that we have the Greek language being the common language is because in that Greek Empire, even though it happened before Rome, you have that Hellenization, right? Where we're gonna make everything Greek, all right. But again, even that, all right, it was used by man as a tool of dominance and control, but God used it as preparation to have one common language through which he could then communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it becomes beautiful. And so the New Testament then, right, is written in what we call common Greek, the Koine Greek. Right. 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 And so the language becomes an incredible factor, right, in the spread of Christianity. And then the second one would be Greek philosophy. The influence of Greek philosophy had more of a negative effect before it had its positive effect. All right, what the Greek philosophy did, it was used to help dismantle polytheism, right, the older religions. When you have the Roman Empire defeating, right, these people who embraced the Greek gods, they realized that their Greek gods could not protect them, all right? And so there was a void. And so many of the Greeks turned their attention to philosophy. And some, such as the philosophy known as Epicureanism, they turned away from even really believing in the supernatural. Right? And it was very materialistic. It was very in the now. All right? Right. And so that was one reaction. So Epicureanism did not produce a solution. It just helped dismantle the old religion. And that's why I say it has a negative effect before it has a positive. Right? The positive... Epicureanism was a Greek philosophy that in many ways rejected the supernatural. It lived for the moment. And that's why sometimes even today Epicurean becomes an adjective for those people who live with no thought beyond the moment. Eat, drink, and marry, for tomorrow we die. And then the other philosophy was called Stoicism. All right. That is, so we've got Epicureanism, and then we have Stoicism. Now, Stoicism gave credence to a God, the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, but he was not a personal being. He was very abstract. All right, and the virtue of Stoicism was human reason. The virtue of Stoicism was to face everything that came your way with no emotion, because it was going to come to you no matter what because of fate. And so the virtue is facing fate. Yeah, facing fate just head on. And you bring tragedy my way, I will not be moved. All right. We are all just susceptible to fate, and that's why when we talk in Reformed theology of determinism, we want to keep in mind that it is not fatalism. See, fatalism is what happens when you have an impersonal God. Fatalism is always paganism. Determinism, right, in Reformed theology, it is the will of a personal God who is all wise and all good and all powerful. And so that's why we don't respond stoically. All right, that's just by the way. All right, so I don't want to confuse the biblical doctrine of God's decrees with the Stoics' view of fate. Two different gods. Right. Right. But what this Greek philosophy does is it shows the failure of the pagan religion. All right. Now again, it brings no solution. But do you see how then that becomes positively something conducive for the expansion of Christianity? You have completely dismantled polytheism. All right? You've completely shown the futility of human reason. What's left? There was a sense, right, in which men were ready for a supernatural religion. Right? Again, all in the providence of God. Now, men seeking after religion apart from grace, they'll never find it. All right? We read that in 1 Corinthians 1, the foolishness of man. But God in His grace orchestrated an environment, right, to which Christianity and the Messiah came. All right, very, very exciting to go in depth into the various social issues going on at the time of Christ. Very exciting to see how God prepared the way. Yes. Right. God is working. And the encouragement is that what He did then, He's doing today. All right, because we're part of now the God orchestrating time for this, if I could say, the second fullness of time, when Christ is coming again. All right, and that's exciting. That's exciting that God is still in control. All right, are there any questions on the expansion of Christianity? We'll go ahead and stop there because I don't want to start point number 3, which is the characteristics of the early church. So we're done with point 1, introduction and expansion of Christianity. Any questions on that? If not, we'll go ahead and stop right now, and we'll pick up tomorrow. All right? Very good. And then tomorrow we'll begin.
Do we have exposition? Do we have this information in that book?
Yes, Gonzalez does address the Jewish factor. Yeah, I'm trying to think what chapter it is covered in. Yeah, chapter 2, the fullness of time, Judaism, and then the Greco-Roman world. Well, that's what we really addressed today. What we'll do tomorrow is some of the characteristics of Christian worship in the early church. So.